Welcome.
My name is Mildred, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, everybody. Please give me the eye if you cannot hear me. I'll try to speak directly into the microphone. Okay so far? Great. You know, it's sufficiently intimidating to get up in front of several thousand people to tell your story, but when you know that you also have to struggle with the sound system, it becomes a little more intimidating. However, these things do happen sometimes. I first of all would like to thank all of you for your hospitality. I know it comes through Maurice and Zippy over here, and Barbara and Greg and the other members of the committee. But I also know that the warmth and the hospitality is a result of everybody that's together. And I can't tell you, of all the conferences that I've been to, you know, I hate to say that this is the best because some of you out there have been my hosts at other conferences, and you'll say, well, what did we do wrong? But let's just say this. This ranks with absolutely the best. I was invited, since I do not have a spouse. Men, I want you to know I am taking applications. I give retreats to the men, and sometimes I do get resumes. They're not always the kind that I would speak about from the podium, however. Anyway, they invited me, since I do not have a spouse, to bring my friend Mary. She contributed to Maryland. We went on that fishing trip the other day, and she fed the fish. I can tell you she fed the fish. So we both feel that we have been treated just so well, and I want to thank you for that. And you particular, Maurice. Maurice is a public relations expert, I believe, because he's kept in touch and just made it possible to have a wonderful time. And then there's Zippy. Right up here. Not Ziggy, Zippy. And Zippy also has been very, very kind. Even though he puts on a bluster, he's really a pussycat underneath. So, thank you. My dry date is May the 18th, 1973. My home group is the Don Mills Group in Toronto. I have a sponsor. I'm active in my home group. I'm actively involved with my sponsor, and I'm actively involved in sponsoring others, because I believe that those are some of the things that make this program work and that have brought into my life the changes that I'm going to talk to you about this morning. I'm very grateful to be an alcoholic, and if you are new, and I'm sure there are a lot of new people out here, you probably are saying, I think I'll upchuck my breakfast. Who's grateful to be an alcoholic? Or you might say, we think she should be locked up. Let me assure you, I have been locked up many times. 32 times that I know of, in one mental institution, psychiatric ward, or insane asylum, in your country and in my own. Sometimes because I wanted to be locked up, sometimes because other folks wanted me to be locked up. I would be locked up from anywhere from 5 days to 5 months. While I was in there, they would give me all the treatments that they had. I've had hundreds of hours of therapy. I have had pills of every type and description, but my very personal favorite was always electroshock treatments. At one time, I had 25, and at another time, I had 13, and I think it was about that time that the song was sung, You Light Up My Life, because light me up they did. I would wind up in those places. Sometimes there was an architectural deficiency. There was no knob on my side of the door. Once I wound up, no, twice, I wound up tied to the bed, and trust me, it was not for fun and frolic. I see that some of you know about that. Some more innocent crowds don't laugh. Sometimes, well, they diagnosed me. They said that I was schizophrenic. Well, doesn't everybody hear voices? They said I was schizoid paranoid schizoid. They said that I was manic depressive depressed. They said that I had a chronic personality disorder, and by the time I get finished, you may well agree. They said that I had an organic personality disorder, and other kinds of diagnoses that seemed to fit the moment. Nobody said to me, do you drink too much? And trust me, I was not going to be telling them that. I expected that, since I had been brought into these hospitals on many occasions drunk, that they might conclude that. But denial is a wonderful thing. And so they didn't say anything about my drinking. I didn't tell them. And one day I met a psychiatrist who said, we think that you are alcoholic and that you should go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a brother who's sober 47 years. So I knew what drinking was like, and I also knew how he had changed in Alcoholics Anonymous. So this was good news, and I thought that psychiatrist deserved a reward, and I gave him one. I married him. I was born on a farm in Saskatchewan. Didn't like that. I was a girl, and I certainly didn't like that. Roman Catholic, I thought all the Protestants had the fun. I was German, and I was ashamed of that. And I was the youngest of 10 kids, and I thought that was obscene. Other than that, my life was perfect. I just never felt comfortable in my skin. I just never felt that I could relate to this family that I was born into. Hated my mother, and then at about 3.5, my first conscious recollection is one of pain, because I realized that somebody was crawling into my bed crying. The person that I'm most attached to in the world, my retarded sister Dora. She would crawl into bed with me and she would cry. I'm 65, so this would have been about 62 years ago, and I don't think we knew much in those days about retardation or learning disabilities. If you couldn't cut the reading business, you were dumb, you were retarded, and that's what she was labeled. She was kept in grade 3 until she was 16. Her name was Dora. They called her Dumb Dora, and it was always my belief that she was far smarter than she was given credit for, that she was really socially retarded, and she found somebody who empathized with her, me. And I cried with her, and she would say, why didn't I die in the cradle? Why was I ever born? And I would cry, and I would say, why didn't I die in the cradle? Why was I ever born? Now, I decided that there was something I could do about this, because she said, nobody dances with me. See, when you're a child, as you well know, you don't know how to handle this kind of stuff. And the reason I'm telling you this is not because I think it made me an alcoholic. I'm alcoholic because I drank alcohol, and alcohol performed the miracle that God and all of the world did not seem able to bring to me at that time. It made me feel whole. I was no longer a quart short when I drank alcohol. I felt terrific and I functioned, you see. So that's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you because as I finally did get into the program, I found out some things about recovery. I found out who I really was, and I found out where this stuff came from. That doesn't take it away, but it certainly helps you to deal with it, as I will explain as I go along. I made conclusions about life because I said to my brothers, you should dance with Dora. Did they? No, they were teenagers. Are they going to listen to a little 3, 4, 5-year-old kid saying, go and embarrass yourself, because that's what it amounted to. Whether we like it or not, that's the way the world is. And so she would come home from the dances, and I would say, did they dance with you? And she would say no, and she would cry, and I would cry. And I made a conclusion about life. I see the world correctly, you don't. And therefore, I'm going to fix my own world. You can see why I eventually came to need the step 3 of our program, and all that stuff that it says about self-will run riot. That was me. You were going to do what I wanted you to do because I was the one who saw the world correctly. And I shut people out. And it wasn't until I was 60 that I really understood all this. Then I tried God. I was a Roman Catholic and went to church, and I never heard what I hear some of you folks say, that you heard hell and damnation. I didn't. I heard that God was love and God was power. Whoopee! I've got the answer now, because if God loves me, loves Dora, loves us all, and if God has power, if God is all the power, which is what the priest said, same thing as in our book, but I didn't see it that way, then I'm going to ask God to fix this thing, and I did, and he didn't. So I thought. You see, I had no idea at that time that God was not here to do my will, that he's not an errand boy, that he's not the great cosmic concierge, and all I have to do is put my little prayer and my little self-will request into the slot, and he's going to do what I want. Never occurred to me that I was here for a larger purpose, that I was here to do God's will, that I was here to fit into the divine plan for human beings. Never occurred to me. And so I was in big trouble with life, and then at 5 I found alcohol. I come from a family where there have been many deaths. I come from a family where there is a brother who almost died of alcoholism, and then he got into the program. He's sober 47 years now. But I didn't know that alcohol could kill you. Alcohol was a welcome friend in our household. My father was an uptight, strict person. When he drank, oh, I loved him. He danced and he sang and he was easy and he flowed with everything, and he would pinch my mother's bottom and he would dance, and life was nice. I liked it when I smelled booze on people. As a matter of fact, I liked my drunken brother better when he had alcohol in it. He was uptight. Our whole household was uptight. If you put booze into us, we functioned better. We were nicer. We were easier with each other. And so when I picked up the drink, I must say this, when I was a little girl, and for a long time, maybe I still somewhere think this, that the whole world would be better if we were all half in the bag all the time. I picked up that drink. I didn't pick up a drink. There was just alcohol around. My father made home brew, and there was always a lot of booze around our house. And I picked up the drink, and I experienced what I had been searching for. I had been looking for a miracle. I had been looking for magic, and I got it. Because all of a sudden, the things that were hurting me so much inside, that were consuming me and preoccupying me, no longer consumed me, no longer preoccupied me. And you see, I think that's what Dr. Silkworth was talking about when he said we're restless, irritable, and discontent, and everything else, until we again experience the ease and comfort that comes from that booze. And to me, that is really what the program is about. I say to myself sometimes, am I getting the ease and comfort from my experience of God, from my experience of the program, from my experience of the fellowship that I used to get from the drink? Because I think that's what it's all about. Turning a self-centered life into a God-directed life. Like Jack said the other night, spirituality is not about getting good, it's about learning to depend totally on God. And that's what I had to do. But right then, I picked up the drink. I experienced what alcohol could do for me. I wasn't scared of it. And for the next 35 years, I never thought sober again. My total preoccupation was, who has the booze? Where is it? What does it cost? Do I have the price? How long are we going to drink? Where are we going to drink? And all that. Never occurred to me that this was a disease that was fatal and that was progressive, and that it would finally scrape from my life everything that was decent and good and leave me shaking and alone. You know, when I tell you that, I've told you my drinking story. I hear people say, well, I was a Scotch drinker. Good for you. I was a booze drinker. I didn't care in what form it came. If it had alcohol in, I was up for it. And if I ran short, I would take other stuff. I even drank vanilla, and I used to drink Chanel No. 5. If I'm in really the right mood these days, I love to go through a department store, and they always want to squirt something on you, don't they? And so I let them do that, and then as I'm strolling away, I'm muttering to myself, sure smells better than it used to taste when I drank it. And they absolutely don't know what to make of that. It did the job. I learned other things when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I learned there were actually people in the world who chilled booze. Excuse me. Why would you chill booze? When you drank the way I did, you see, I had a large capacity right from the start. You know, my preoccupation with, as I said, was with who had the booze. It was not who has the chilled booze. And I heard, too, that there were actually people who only drank certain drinks out of certain glasses. Hello? A bottle wrapped in a brown paper bag in a washroom in a bus terminal certainly is a great place to do it. Got the job done just as well as it gets done out of a fancy crystal glass. So that was me. There was a time in my life that I drank 2 26s a day. I'm not proud of that, but it was the way my disease progressed. You know, I always used to look down on beer drinkers. How would anybody ever get a kick out of beer? I thought you had to drink hard liquor. And so eventually, because doesn't everybody know if you drink vodka, you don't smell, right? Your eyes can be poked out of your head, and you can be staggering and all kinds of other things, and the stuff can be coming out of your pores, but oh God, you don't smell, so drink vodka. Yeah, right. At 18, I decided to go to a convent. You see, you think that's funny, do you? Some other people grew to think that was funny, too. See, I was a weird little kid. My brothers and sisters used to say, see, my mom and dad lived in Maryland, very close to here for a while after they were married. My mother and dad were both Americans, and my oldest sister was born here in Maryland. And now, why was I telling you that? Just having a senior moment. I'm entitled. My brothers and sisters. My father then went to Saskatchewan, which is, if you don't know, it's north of Montana and North Dakota. And it's prairie land, and he was given 160 acres, and that's where he was a pioneer there. My older brothers and sisters had to work. By the time I came along, my father was wealthy, and so I didn't have to work. And my sisters and brothers used to say to me, you're so lucky. You can go to school, you can be anything that you want. What they didn't know was already the disease of alcohol was ravaging me. I had learned to be afraid because I learned as a little girl, you don't have any power. You don't have the ability to change things. And what I didn't know was that I was full of fear because I developed this exterior that said, hey, I can handle anything. But inside I was always dying. So, same thing. I went to high school, same thing. I was always on the outside. You want something done, you get Mildred to do it. But Mildred is never part of the group because I've got the walls up. You come anywhere near me, you come too close, and you get no closer to me. And so at 18, I decided that I was going to make a grand appeal to God to fix my life because I knew that I was in trouble. Part of it was running away, part of it was a lot of goofy stuff. You know, the book says we made decisions based on self, which later put us in a position to be hurt. Well, I was drunk the night I entered. Tells you as much about them as it does about me, I guess. They took me anyway. And in the 15 years that I was there, somebody said to me yesterday, did you wear a habit? Of course I wore a habit, out to here. And did all the nun things. It was like a semi-cloistered convent that I went to, and we followed monastic tradition, and I had vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And I was a good nun. I worked hard. I was a teacher. I went to university. I became a musician. I directed operettas. I directed choirs. I had to be close to the Mass wine. And I used to think, how can I keep this from the priest? Because I ordered the Mass wine. Whoopee! And I'd think he's going to be criticizing me for all the Mass wine I'm ordering. What I didn't know till later, he too was alcoholic. He too was dipping into it. I can tell you that parish buzzed. At the end of 15 years, most of which I had been drunk. But you see, at this point, I was functioning. I was a functioning. When I was not drinking, I was like my father, uptight and stern and whatever. And when I drank, you could get along with me. I could study better. I could teach better. I could do everything better. Now, you know how it is when you are the only person drinking in an environment. Well, maybe you don't know. Maybe the others know. But when you're the only person drinking in an environment where nobody's drinking, how can they miss smelling you? The only time I was smelled, I think, was the night I drank the 28 fluid ounces of vanilla. And the superior kept saying to the house sister, "Sister, you must have baked cakes today. You must have baked cakes." And she said, "No, I didn't." And 10 minutes later, she'd say, "You must have been baking cakes." It was actually just me in the corner burping. Anyway, after 15 years, Mother Superior called me in, and I left the convent, and that's another whole story, which I don't really have time to get into, but I can tell you it was like a funeral. Leaving the convent, I was asked not to disassociate myself from anybody that I knew. And I remember standing on the convent steps January the 10th, 1966, in my secular clothes. I had been dispensed from the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and I no longer had to keep the holy rule, and so I was free, so to speak. And I remember standing there thinking I was okay. This is the same person who had had the privilege of studying psychology and all kinds of stuff, and I didn't know that the problem was inside me. I thought you were the problem. I thought my mom and dad were the problem. I thought my problems with my retarded sister were the problem. My family, the fact that I told you I'm German, I'm Roman, all that stuff, that was my problem. And if only that stuff were different, I'd be okay. I really believed that. And I can only tell you that in the next 10 months, I lost my innocence because I no longer had the benefit of a habit. I could go to the liquor store. I could go to the bars. I went down to the bars and I found the rounders. The first date I went on, the bartender came and asked my date what would I like? And I said 3 triple Tom Collinses. I thought I would just save them trouble. As you can see, I was never asked out by that man again. But I just became worse and worse and worse, and finally had myself signed into an insane asylum. And there I met, my brother found me and took me back to the West. My family is out there, and they wanted me where they could help me. You know, and help for them was, what do you need? We'll try and provide it for you. So I went to another psychiatrist, and that's where I met my husband. He too was not too tightly wrapped. Anybody that would date me at that time would have to be not too tightly wrapped. You know, I said it before, I think it was Phil who said this the first time. He said their neuroses were complementary. The rocks in his head fit the holes in hers, and that about describes us. He too was alcoholic and couldn't manage his own life. And there I tried to fix him with religion. He tried to fix me with psychiatry. And I can tell you there were many, many strange events. He did introduce me to Alcoholics Anonymous. He was sober when I met him. And, you know, I think about this and I say we had a relationship. No, we didn't. We had a parasitic entanglement. I had something he wanted. He had something I wanted. I was 18 years his junior. He was obviously somebody with prestige. He was on staff at the university hospital. He was a professor and all that kind of thing. And so I thought he would carry me to the good life. If you've got any ideas that happiness is out there, I'm here to tell you I've learned that it's absolutely an inside job. It's a God deal, and that's the only deal it ever can be. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous for 5.5 years. And I need to tell you this because I wanted to be here. I liked AA for 3 weeks. And then the real work, you know, our book says alcohol is only the symptom. You know, and people always said to me, you drink too much. Number one, how can you drink too much when you can't drink enough? That's the first problem. Secondly, life, as far as I could see, I behaved much better when I drank. Now, true, I got thrown into jail, I got thrown into psych wards and all that, but my mother used to say, you're such a nice girl if you only wouldn't drink so much. And what I couldn't communicate was, I'm insane when I don't drink. I can't stand myself, and I can't stand anybody else either. The only relief I have in life is when I drink. So when I got sober, you know, it's one thing not to drink, it's another to live in sobriety. And so I had also been introduced to various kinds of pills, and I knew that they could change the way I felt. So I sat in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous for 5.5 years, stoned. I don't recommend it. It just kind of interferes with the way you hear what's read up here, and the way you do your steps and all that kind of stuff. And after 5.5 years, I walked away from Cease, who was my sponsor. I think you probably have had Cease speaking here. And, you know, Cease knew what he was doing, and everybody knew that I was stoned all the time, but there wasn't anything they could do about it. The program was there for me. Cease used to say she carries the disease rather than the message, and I think that kind of described me. That's why, you know, I'm here to tell you that I learned then that going to meetings is not enough. Going to meetings is great. Not drinking, good stuff, but the day has to come where you take those steps, that program, and introduce it into your being so that God can make the changes in me and in you that you can't do yourself. And that's what I learned through that 5.5 years. I went out drinking again, and if I thought I was in trouble in 1966, I didn't know what trouble was. I was to wind up with DTs and convulsions and blackouts and sleeping on a park bench, and every door of people that had once loved me and admired me closing the door, and if they knew that I was there, absolutely wouldn't open the door. We had no money, and that's where that took me. So I think I've identified. You see, and like John said last night, the first drink is a mental one. This time it's going to be different. And there's something in that book that I have paid close attention to in these 25 years of my sobriety. A couple of things. One, it says alcohol beat us into a state of reasonableness, and isn't that the truth? And you know what? When alcohol got done with me, life took over. My 25 years in the program, I wish I could tell you, have been straight up. They haven't. They've been a roller coaster ride, because so often I have resisted the grace of God, and then I have to suffer some more, and I have to learn what it is that I have to surrender, and then another surrender takes place, and I can move to another level of comfort, and then the day comes when another surrender is necessary. But I didn't know that in May of 1973. And I came to a day after a 10-day blackout where I was in a psych ward, and I woke up on Friday night and there were two men sitting at the foot of the bed, and they really were there. And one was a psychiatrist and one was a private detective who had been hired to find me. And the other thing I was going to mention before, alcohol beat us, but the other thing is, it says in there, we're strangely insane. We have strange mental blank spots. And I found that out both through my drinking, and I found it out in living, because I still have the capacity today to see what happened to me before, and there's a blank place in there. And I go and do the same thing again, expecting to get different results. It doesn't happen, you see. So these two men were sitting at the foot of the bed, and I was immobile. I had what they called alcoholic paralysis, and I stayed in the bed till diapered. I was 40 years old. I don't really think that's what my dad and mother had in mind for me when they brought me into the world, that I'd be 40 years old lying there with diapers on. Sunday morning, the nurse took me to the washroom, and I saw myself. I saw my face. And, it was black and blue. I had a great big half moon around my face. Some teeth were knocked out, and my hair was straggly. I weighed all of 85 pounds. I looked in the mirror, and I started to cry and said, I've become a woman of the streets. And the nurse said, yes, you have. And after breakfast, she took me back to my room, and I reached the point that morning where the line, I saw it clearly in the sand. The line in the sand was, what are you going to do? You have no money, your husband can't look after you, you have no friends, your family will take you, but they'll only take you on one condition, that you don't drink. Unacceptable. There's no place to go except the streets. That's unacceptable. I'm going to take my life. And it was at that point, you see, I've had this experience a couple of times in my life where I get to the end of my solutions, wiped out, and then God appears. And God appeared that morning. That's all I can tell you. For a long time I wouldn't talk about this, but I had a spiritual experience that morning. And the compulsion to drink was taken away. And I have to tell you that in 25 years I've struggled with a lot of things, but I've never struggled with the urge to drink. It was washed clean. I have come to believe in the power of God, and I have come to believe also that I don't know when I'm ready. My plan that morning was take your life. God knew that I was ready to surrender. You see, I don't think that sobriety is a question of God saying, here, I'm going to smack you over the head and you can no more drink. My part is to say yes to the gift. See, I've received lots of gifts since Tuesday, and I could say no to those gifts. If I give you a package this morning, you can say no. You can tramp it under your feet. You can throw it in the garbage, and that's what I did with the gift of life and with the gift of sobriety. And God knew that morning I was ready to say yes. Yes to whatever it was. I remember that morning because I had no illusions that the life ahead of me was going to be easy, because somewhere deep in my soul, and I think we need to learn to listen to our soul. We listen to all kinds of therapists and gurus out there, and we don't listen to our own souls. My soul was telling me, you've got a lot of work to do, lady. You don't know anything about living. And for the first time in my life, I said, I'm going to go the distance. Send me somebody who can teach me. I don't know how to live. You see, I believe that I really stopped growing when I picked up the first drink. Didn't have to grow anymore. Don't feel good? Pick up a drink. Feel good? Pick up a drink. Whatever was going in my life, I didn't develop any spiritual muscles. I did, that being in the convent was an exterior thing. Nothing was happening in here. There was no surrender going on. We can do the stuff on the outside, and that's where we start this program, with actions we don't believe in, but it's got to eventually come in here, where it's the change that takes place. That's what I believe. It says in the book that this is what this book is about. Not about teaching you to go to meetings. It's about helping you to find the power greater than yourself who will solve your problem. I once read that to my sponsor. I read, who will solve my problems. He said, read it again. I read it 5 times, and finally he said, for heaven's sake, look at the last word and read it again. And I read it again. Who will help you solve your problem. He said, what do you think your problem is? Well, I said, my husband. Not a good answer. Money, lack of money, not a good answer. Don't know how to live, not a good answer. And finally I understood. My problem was me. It was what I had going on in here in terms of self-will run riot. The world has to be the way I have determined, just like at 3.5, and if you don't do it the way I want, you're out. I'll fix it myself. So I said to God, you have to send me somebody, or to whatever power was in that room that morning. And I swear to you, as I stand here, there was a rap on the door and a man stood there. He looked real to me. He said to me, do you have a drinking problem? And I said, yes. Do you want to make something of it? He said, no. He said, I just would like to offer to take you to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, no way. I was there 5.5 years, and they don't have the answer. They didn't help me. See, somebody else was supposed to supply the magic, and I'm telling you, there ain't nobody out there who can do the work that is between my soul and God. And so he said, would you go to a treatment center? And to make a long story short, I did, and got out of there. And then I learned about the ABCs. I didn't know them yet, but I do now, that I'm alcoholic, I'm a human being, and I cannot run my own life. B, that probably no human power can do it. No psychiatrist, no nurse, no counselor, no therapist. Nobody can do that. That God could and would if he were sought. I tried to stay sober on the aftercare that the treatment center provided. This is not a criticism of them. Statement of fact. They don't have what the book says I lack. I lack power. I don't have any of myself. God is the power. God has the power, and I've got to go there to get things done. And so, but they're not going to be done on my time. And so, after 6 months, I got out of the treatment center after a month and went to live on Skid Row. We had no money. We had nothing. And it was about 4 months into this period. My husband was depressed. He sat there, and if I thought he was going to fix my life, I can tell you that was not the way it was going to be, and this is not a criticism of him. He's dead now. But you know, he was sick the way I was sick. I had separated myself from God in consciousness, and so had he. I had turned against human beings, so had he. So we were kind of in this boat together. He was sitting there depressed, so I went out and got a job. My dad and my mother, I used to criticize them so much, they had taught me, you look after yourself. I went out and got a job and made $2.20 an hour, and I can tell you that didn't put food on the table, and there were days we didn't have food. And I can remember, though, as this process went on, I started to change, because for the first time in my life, I was doing the things that I needed to do, whether they felt good or not. And I'm going to tell you about the 3 P's in that first year of sobriety. The first P was poverty, as I've already described to you. We had 2 dogs. I don't usually talk about this, but Peggy said I ought to, so I'll tell you about this, because it has to do with my soft underbelly. I had reached a point in life where I couldn't afford to look to the right and left. I couldn't afford to take an easy, soft way. And those 2 little dogs that we had, they were purebred Boston Bull Terriers, and I can still feel Tammy sitting on my shoulder, and she was about, you know, like about a big ball, and she would sit there and she would lick my face. And by this time, there was nobody in the world that loved us, or that it seemed loved us. But those dogs loved us unconditionally, and we ran to them for our comfort. I couldn't love my husband, he couldn't love me, but boy, we went to those dogs for comfort. And I knew that that wasn't going to work. First of all, we couldn't afford to keep them, and second, I knew that they fostered my soft underbelly, and I was going to have to do this the hard way. And so I convinced my husband, and we had the dogs put to sleep. I figured that, you know, some people have come to me when I've said this, and they've said, how could you be so cruel? The cruelty was, when we wanted to drink, we'd shove those dogs in the kennel. And then when it suited our purposes, when we wanted a little love and comfort, we'd pull them out, and then we'd shove them back in the kennel, and then we'd pull them out again. And I just knew that this was a place in my life. It was for another time. It wasn't for now. If I'd have known anybody that I could have given them to and felt they wouldn't be abused, I guess I would have done that. I remember the day that those dogs were put to sleep. I thought that I was going to die. If you had said, here, give me your right arm and you know, we'll make this okay. It wasn't that kind of deal. It was one of the tough things, and it was after that, I believe, that I really started to grow. And one day I walked into meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was still waking up hearing the patter of the dog's feet. I'd wake up, I'd have dreams that they were crawling over the bed. And shortly thereafter, in despair, I came into a meeting. Doesn't matter why you come here, it's what you do when you get here. And so the second thing that took over was the people. It wasn't very long. You know, I hadn't heard these words in a long time, keep coming back. And people said, keep coming back, we need you. What? You need me? And I kept coming back, and it was warm and it was loving. And let's not ever forget, we need to look at our newcomers. I think we need to look at our old comers too, because they too have problems. You know, just because you're around here a while, you don't get over the thing that you need comfort and you need help. Anyway, the people in AA became very important to me. Like a woman who came to me and said, you are the most selfish, self-centered, ugly person it has ever been my misfortune to meet. And I knew she was telling me the truth. At last, somebody told it like it was. My psychiatrist, not my husband, my other one, I went to him to tell him I was going to commit suicide, and he said, if you want to commit suicide, go ahead. But he said, stop your whining. You want to get well, there are things you have to do. I needed people like that. And there was Ted Lynch who said, do the do things. I could understand simple things like that. And there was my first sponsor who got drunk shortly thereafter, who said to me, you get well. Your husband may or he may not, but you can get well. I needed to know that. And then there was the program. You know, I was in here about, I guess a month and a half, and I started to really love being at meetings. It was so safe here. Everybody was so nice. Oh, it was so good to be at the meetings, and I loved it. But there was just one hitch. I was waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it wasn't nice. I was afraid. There was a football in my stomach. And I thought, are we always going to be this poor? And you know, all those old thoughts kept running through my head. And I went back to the meeting, and I would talk about this, and two of the guys at my group said, you have to do the steps. And wonder of wonders, for the first time in my life, I said, I don't know how. That's quite an admission for an ex-nun. That's for somebody who's supposed to have all this spiritual stuff together. You know, I have had people say to me sometimes, you priests and nuns are so lucky. Oh, really? You know, because we think we know. And then we come to a program like Alcoholics Anonymous, and we need to get sawed off at the knees just like everybody else. You know who taught me about God? Simple people, simple alcoholics, simple people, men and women in AA and Al-Anon, and young people in Alateen. I listened to your stories. I saw what had happened to you, and I saw a way of life that I didn't understand. And for me to say to them, I don't know what this is all about, was a great admission of humility. And they told me how to do the steps. They said, come every night when we have our home group, come an hour early and we will teach you. And they did. They took the book. I don't remember much of it, but what I do remember is this. I really worked at my fourth. And when I read my fourth to myself, before I went to do my fifth, I remember shouting out, wow, this is good, because you know what? I understood for the first time in my life, I understood I was the problem. Nobody else had to change. You know, the buck stops there. It really does. What you are is what you are. It's what you've got to deal with. And what I am is what I am. Moose, who was in the program, Moose was still alive when I came in, and he always used to say, it is not important what you think of me. It is very important what I think of you. And I'd follow Moose and say, explain that to me, Moose. And he'd say, you're the one. If you've got hatred and you've got unloving stuff in here and you're full of resentment and whatever, and you're judging and criticizing, nobody can help you. This is an inside job. You've got to get rid of that stuff. If they've got that stuff, let them deal with it. Let them deal with their God. And so I did the steps. And then the God deals started to happen. I got my medallion one day. We give medallions as an anniversary celebration of the program. And the day after, a voice said to me, look in the paper for a teaching job. I never thought that I would teach again because I was thrown out of my last school and told never to return. And I went to look for this look in the paper, and I saw one that said English teacher, and I thought maybe that's what I could do. And I went and applied. And I was together that morning as much as I'm together this morning. They couldn't believe that this wonderful person had walked into their office. You tell me that that's not a God deal, because I was still quite crazy. And they gave me that job. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. I was going to be teaching emotionally disturbed adolescents kids who came on Monday morning and said, look, miss, and they'd point to their wrists. This is where the police put the handcuffs. Those were the kinds of kids I was teaching. They were kids with learning disabilities, 16, 17 years old, who'd never learned to read. You know what? Except for the handcuffs, very much like my sister Dora. And I got to serve them for 20 years, the proudest years of my career. I felt it was really a God deal. Now I got into the school. How do you handle yourself? You know, I was now amongst my peers, and I thought I was Mrs. AA, and I was going to march in there, and everything was going to be cool. I can tell you it wasn't like that. Many of those teachers became my mentors and taught me some things that maybe I should have learned at 5 and 6 and at 10 and 11 and that I never had. They taught me how to deal with my emotions. They taught me how to act at meetings and all that kind of thing. And I got busy in AA, and I started sponsoring, and I was sponsored, and I went to lots of meetings and whatever. And I'm now sober 7 years, and I have paid off my debts. I've paid off my husband's debts. Fellas, you should have known me then. And I have paid off our debts. And I'm sitting there saying, look at those people out there. I work harder in AA. Like, if you want to stay stuck, criticize, judge. It's a great way never to move from where you are today. I sat there and I judged everybody. I've got my old rusty car. I've got my rusty furniture. And look at that big car. He doesn't work as hard in AA. My sponsor said, come here. We have to do the steps again. And we did the steps again. And you know, every time I brought myself to that process, I brought myself with as much devotion as I could, with as much energy as I could. And every time, something fabulous has happened. Because the gift of that time, the first time I learned who the problem was. This time I learned to get rid of some anger. My sponsor said, you are a cauldron of resentment and anger still. I didn't know. You know, you didn't, any of you have parents like I did, you didn't talk back to them. If something was going on, you didn't express your feelings. Children were meant to be seen and not heard. That's the way I was raised. And if you didn't like it, that was tough. You just kept it someplace. It doesn't make the anger go away. And my sponsor explained that to me, and he said, it's safe here. And so the anger came out. It was like a deluge of pus. And I felt cleansed inside in a way that I hadn't been before. And after that, one day, another God deal showed up. I went to talk to a friend, and she said, you should start buying houses. What do you mean, start buying houses? You know, I had just paid off my debts. And she said, come over on Saturday night and I'll show you what we're doing. And at that time, the tax laws were advantageous and all that stuff. To make a long story short, on a Saturday night, they explained it to me, and by the next Saturday, I had my first house. And I can tell you that for the next 10 years, it was as if I could do no wrong. I made pots full of money. And you know, I'm telling you this not because I think this is important in itself. What is important about it is what I learned, because I had always thought men have the power to make money. Men have the power. Men, because they have money, they're the ones with the power, and I can't get this power because I'm only a woman. In my family, the women raised gardens and babies, and I was having none of it. And here, I made piss pots. Whoops. I made pots full of money. And one day my banker said, why don't you buy yourself a house? And I did. I bought the big house and got all the custom designed furniture, and the red convertible was sitting on the driveway, and I'm telling you, I had it made, did I? I can tell you, I sat on my sofa and cried because I was as empty in my soul as I had ever been, and I had to say, this isn't it either. Anybody been there? You think you gotta have that relationship. You think you've gotta have that stuff. You've gotta have whatever it is, and you get it, and you sit there, and you're as empty as you ever were. That's what that was about. I believe God was telling me, you can't ever again say that you haven't had stuff. You've had stuff, and that isn't what it's about. You gotta go deeper. And I went to my sponsor, and again we did the steps. Right from beginning, read the book, did the steps, right through the whole process, and again I changed. And I realized that I had a relationship in my life that had to go, and I realized that I was hanging on to a teaching job. I could have kept it till I was 65, but you know, sometimes when you know that you're hanging on to something that you shouldn't be hanging on to, and you gotta let it go. And I was sitting there one day, and I heard the voice say, you gotta let this teaching job go. There's other stuff. And I realized the man in my life, way back, 1.5 years sober, I'd left my husband. You know, sponsors say don't get involved. Sponsors never know what they're talking about anyway, do they? So I got hooked up with a guy in the program. 3 weeks later, he's drunk. And I think, well, he's got me. Poor guy, you know, he doesn't know how to do this. He's got me now. And I can tell you, as Jack said the other night, it's harder to love somebody with a problem than it is to deal with your own problem. And for 2.5 years, I tried to give him my vision of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know what? It ain't gonna happen. It didn't work. And after 2.5 years, one day, I'm standing over him at some, and he thinks he can taper off. And he said to me, Millie, get me some beer. My vision was, you pray. I grabbed him by the ears and I said, you pray. He said, I don't want to pray. I want beer. Well, he's sick and shaking. He's lying down. I'm strong and healthy and determined, and I'm standing. And I took those ears and I pounded his head on the bed and I said, you pray, you son of a bitch. And then I went to Al-Anon. It had never occurred to me, just like it had never occurred to me that people would chill booze. It had never occurred to me that you could be happy if you didn't get your way, if other people didn't change. Now there's a new concept. Go do whatever you like. I can still be happy. Wow! Anyway, now I had another man in my life, 15 years. I don't know how to do relationships. You know, John and Karen, God, you can see the love between them. I've known them for years, you know. You feel the love between them. And then there's Jean and Jack. And, you know, other people that I've known. They live in sobriety in their relationships. I don't know how to do relationships because I don't know how to tell the truth in a relationship. Or I didn't. What's wrong? Nothing. There must be something wrong. Your face is this long. Oh, nothing. It helps then if a tear rolls down your cheeks. And so on. But you know what? His problems were not mine. And the day I said goodbye to him, I said, look, you're a beautiful human being, but you know what? If I stay in this relationship, I'm going to die. Now, I wish I could tell you, I gave up the job and I gave up the man within a couple of months. And, you know, I was smart enough. I was sober 20 years, and I had been through those steps again, and I knew that I was in for the change of my life. Sometimes I think when you're newer in sobriety, you think these old-timers have it all made, but this is a living program. You have to keep changing, and the surrender that was appropriate at 10 days is not maybe appropriate Other things have to get stripped off. And I stood there as desperate as I have ever been. And what went through my head was, you have no kids, you have no family around here, you don't have a job anymore, you don't amount to anything. Who would care if you died? And I fell into a serious depression. And one day I decided I would take my life. I'm sober 20 years, and I'm again at the end of my plans. I don't know how to fix my life. You ever been there? My solution was get off the planet. It wasn't as if I was lying and cheating and whoring around and doing all kinds of stuff. I was doing everything I knew how to do. You know what? That's a great place for God to enter. When you have done everything you know how to do and you can't go any further. And one day I lay there and I said, this is it. I'm taking my life today. And I lay in bed all day. And that night about 6 o'clock, I put my hand out of the bed. And there was a scribbler there, and I opened it. And in my handwriting, this is what I read. I don't even know when I wrote this. Mildred, can you make the pain go away? And I had written, absolutely not. Mildred, can you take your life out of the toilet? Absolutely not. And then I saw, as clearly as I see you, I saw page 62 of the big book where it says, we made decisions based on self, which later put us in a position to be hurt. And it says in there, we have to be rid of this or it kills us. God makes that possible. And the last sentence in that paragraph says, we could not reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own. We had to have God's help. And one more time, I experienced grace. I can only describe it because I was filled with an absolute radiance that I bounded out of bed like it was like that. It happened instantaneously, and I knew that it was all okay, that God was in charge, and the happiness, I charged out of bed, and I did what I know best how to do. I got dressed. I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous where I could be with my people and where I could again experience what it is that we experience here. And I went to that meeting, and I wish I could tell you that that feeling of exuberance lasted. But you know, I think when we have these experiences, they're always followed by the work that has to be done. And I had to learn to put one foot ahead of the other without any conditions and not say, well, if I do this, then that's going to happen. I just did it because it was the right thing to do. And one day the phone rang. I didn't know how my life was going to develop. And one day the phone rang, and it was a Jesuit, and he said, I've heard about you. Would you like to come and give retreats at the retreat center? And from that developed a whole life. You know, how the workings of God. You see, I went there and I started giving retreats on the spirituality of the 12 steps. And people liked what I had to say, and they started asking me to help them through the book and to read this and do the steps with them. And there were so many people, I couldn't do them all separately, so I started little groups. And then from that, they asked me to do spiritual study classes. And all kinds of things of that nature came into my life. And one day, I thought, why do I always resist? Well, the other thing that came about through working with people, I found out I didn't like people. Jeez. Here I'm trying to help them. You know what it was? I found out I had the walls up. One day I'm finishing a retreat in front of 75 women, and I start crying. See, I'm tough like the men. I don't cry. Well, that morning I started crying, and I couldn't stop. I cried and I cried, and it came out of me. I said, you know what? I've been shutting you people out all my life. and I said, it's time that I let you in. And I had to go to people and say, I'd like to be friends with you. Could we try and have coffee? And it felt uncomfortable taking my walls down because I had to become vulnerable and I had to let you see who I really am and how it really is with me inside. But I did it. And I can tell you that as a result of that, I have a rich, full life. One other thing that happened to me in that experience was this. One day I was going home, and you see, you folks who are married or who live in couples, I believe that you have certain stresses on you that those of us who live alone don't have. Isn't that right? When you live alone, you have other things you have to learn how to eat properly. You have to learn how to go to bed properly alone. You have to learn how to look after yourself, how to look after your financial things, because there's nobody there. Now, you don't have the stresses and strains and the pulls of somebody living with you, but I had to learn how to be alone. And one day as I was going home, I thought, I'm always scared. I always feel funny when I'm going home. What's wrong with me? And I realized something, that when I was a little girl, my father, as I said, was uptight. And he was always nicer if I brought company home. And that very morning, I had been reading and talking about to this group that I was teaching or sharing with about this chapter or this paragraph in the chapter to the agnostics. There comes the day when by a self-imposed crisis, we have to ask ourselves, do I believe in God or not? And if I do I believe that God is everything or nothing? All of a sudden, it became clear to me. What do you believe, Mildred? You believe there's a power bigger than you? Absolutely. Do you believe that power is a Mickey Mouse power? Is your God so small that he isn't in your home? Is your God so small that he isn't around the whole universe, that he's everywhere? And what I realized was, God fills everything. God is everywhere. I don't know how to explain that. My intellect can't grab that one, I can tell you, thank God. But my heart knows that's to be the truth. And that day, my depression left me, my fear left me, and my thought that I could fix my own life, it left me. And I've not had it back, because a new level of surrender came for me through that process. A new level of surrender that says what I think step one is really about. I don't think it's only about not drinking alcohol, because that's no big deal. But what do I do with that idea that I'm powerless? I think that's why we're alcoholics, because God said to us, look, you guys, you don't understand something. You think you're the boss. You think that you have the entitlement to sit on my throne, and you don't. So I'm going to let you become alcoholic, and you're going to find out that once you're a pickle, you'll never be a cucumber again. Doesn't matter whether you like it or not. And I started to understand, I'm a guest here. And I'm a good guest, aren't I, Maurice? I didn't complain a bit this week. Had nothing to complain about, but I know how to be a guest. And if I'm a guest on God's planet, then you're guests too. And if I'm a guest, I shouldn't push you around. I shouldn't expect you. I don't tell people how to run their lives. And so it changed something in me. It softened something in me. And I have to tell you that through this process, I've learned, and then I'll sit down, that God's the boss. And I believe that I really have only one character defect, and that is I play God. When I get up in the morning and I remember who is the boss, and that is what my step 3 commitment is all about, a decision to let God be God, my days go well. They don't always go the way I want them. And to me, that's the healing from the 3.5-year little girl to this place where I can let God be God. And when I do, I have beautiful days. Everything goes right. You know the old saying, love what you have, don't want what you don't have, because that puts you in another position. Well, I see time has whipped past, and I'd like to share with you the definition of Alcoholics Anonymous that I think is the best definition I ever heard. It is the process whereby we lead you gently back to yourself. I have been led very gently, it seems to me, to the 12th step, which says that as the result of doing these steps, you will wake up spiritually. You will wake up to the fact that God is everything. There ain't nothing else. And when you chase stuff because you want it and because it's not God's will, your holes are going to hurt as much as they ever did. And if you can get to the point where you say, God is everything, therefore, my step 3 prayer really means something. Now, my step 7 prayer means, I give you the good and the bad. I know that you're present in everything. Sometimes I need an upside on the head. All is well. See, I don't think that this program, that the goal of it is to give us money or property or prestige or relationships or whatever. Step 12 says that as the result of these steps, you're going to have a spiritual awakening. You're going to find out what life is all about, that it's a lot different than you thought it was, that it can be a lot easier if you can surrender. That has been your gift to me. You see, I think it's like this. I read, the ocean manifests in many waves, and I believe the Great Spirit manifests in many expressions. You and you and you and you and each one of us and every tree and everything that's around, and in me too. So when I look at you, I look at myself. That has been your gift to me, and in finding that out, I have found myself. God bless you all.